Thank you, Mel, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you also for your patience as we work to get through some of the challenges that we have, as I'm sure you all are experiencing in your day-to-day work. Technology is a great solver and also sometimes problematic. So thank you for your patience. I'm here today because Cornerstone is the sponsor for the Training Officers Consortium's Roundtable. For those of you that are not familiar with Cornerstone, we are a talent management company. We help organizations recruit, train, and manage their people. We help engage workforces and empower your people. As part of that, that includes learning and development, performance management, succession planning, recruiting, you name it, we have done it. And it is our pleasure to sponsor this. And I am going to turn this over to my friend and colleague, Ed Turry, who has a very exciting panel that we're going to share with you very shortly. So Ed, why don't you take us away?
All right, thank you, Steve. Hey, everybody, it's great to be here. As I was preparing for this session, I was thinking about the title of creating a coaching culture. And I thought back to 10, 15 years ago, I worked for an organization that delivered coaching services. And we used to host these types of sessions all the time, and the same title, How to Create a Coaching Culture. And they were always very popular, but there was one difference. And at that time, people would come to us and they wanted insight and they wanted to learn how to go about doing this. And the problem was no one had ever really built a coaching culture yet, or very few organizations had. And so it was sort of as if we talked about what it would like if you did build it. Well, fast forward 10, 15 years later, many organizations have gone down that path. And we're really fortunate today because we have 4 pioneers, those folks that have done that hard work and have, whether it's in federal and private organizations, have begun to do the work of building a coaching culture. And so I'm just excited to learn from them and to listen to them today and get to hear best practices and see what you should do and maybe a little bit about what you shouldn't do. The way I'd like to kind of kick this off, I'm going to just ask each of them to introduce themselves and to do so in the way, one thing I've learned about coaching and being in it for so many years is that coaches are really passionate. They love coaching, they love what they do, and they got hooked on it somehow. And so I want to ask each of you, and we'll go around, is just to share briefly what got you hooked on coaching. So Mary Kate, I'm going to start with you. You're the director of the Treasury Executive Institute. You've headed up leadership development and coaching programs in many agencies. I know you're passionate about coaching. What got you hooked?
I think what really got me hooked is I actually started coaching by accident. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I did a lot of project management work and work overseas. And I realized that I wasn't the one with the answers. I had to ask a lot of questions. And so I actually started coaching and then went back and got coach training and realized that's what I was doing. And it's because I wasn't the smartest one in the room and I needed other people to solve the problem. So that's what got me hooked.
Great. Thank you, Mary Kate. I'd like to go to Alan Fine next, and we're really lucky to have Alan with us today. Alan, you wrote a best-selling book. You already know how to be great. You're co-founder of the Grow model, which I have used. It's a fantastic model. You're the founder of Inside Out Development. So we're looking forward to hearing from you today. But talk a little bit about what you hooked on coaching.
I got involved in coaching really by accident. So I have a former career as a tennis coach. And the first time I got involved in coaching was when I was 11 years old, believe it or not. And I showed some promise at tennis. And the coach at the club said, and this is very British, in return for being allowed to play with the adults, you have to help me with the 6 and 9-year-olds, which was my first experience of coaching. But it was, I guess there's some kind of karmic influence in my life because I took to it. And the thing that if there's an event that really hooked me, I would call it coaching now, but at the time, I think they would call it therapy. I had an experience of somebody creating an environment for me to examine my own thinking. And it was so profound for me that that was the point at which I realized I'm called to do this. And frankly, it's just changed the path of my life. So it's been, even if I wanted to get out of doing it, it's interesting listening to Mary Kay, given that I have no other qualifications as a tennis coach, so everybody's more expert than me. It's kind of like coaching is the only thing left for me.
Thank you. And I love the phrase, I'm called to do this. I think that a lot of coaches feel that way, right? Once they see what it is and they say, yes, this is who I am and this is what I should be doing. Thank you. John, let's jump over to you. You have a really interesting background as a crisis manager, which we'll talk a little bit about that later. You're a certified mediator, strategist, and you've got a lot of leadership experience. What got you into coaching?
Yes, as Alan, by the way. It's two Alans on the panel. So
no, I was saying John, actually. I was going to John.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all right, Alan. Ed, hey, thank you for the question. I'm a federal government employee under the Treasury Department at one of our branches at Treasury. I was running a PMO at that time, a program management office in the IT organization. I just happened to be over at TEI, where Mary Kay leads, and I was taking a class. I walked outside of TEI, saw a brochure that says, hey, do you want to coach? My day was pretty hard being in the IT organization, being a director of a PMO. I said, you know, can't hurt. I played a lot of sports growing up. I said to coach, well, let's see what that's about. And the gentleman who coached me was on his last year of working. He was near 70, and I guess I was his last coachee. I learned a lot. I loved the guy. He brought a whole lot of awareness, experiences I didn't know myself. I'm a complete extrovert to begin with, and so I didn't realize that. Retook Myers-Briggs and got a different vector path. Then TEI sent out a request if you wanted to be a coach. It was about like filling out a college application. I filled it out. I was accepted, and many different doors opened up since then. Yes, I'm a federal mediator. I mediated at some of our finest government agencies. I've previously in my life was trained by the chaplains at the Johns Hopkins Medical Hospital. I'm certified there. And lo and behold, I kept on just trying to study and take on clients. I take on clients internal and external to the organization. I just completely enjoy coaching, the communication, the collaboration, working together with a client. And I could do this all day long. That's when you really know you love it. Just a quick note is when I was a contractor years ago at the FAA, I remember hearing a 747 pilot who worked for Delta Airlines say to me, John, I would fly these things for free. Just don't tell Delta Airlines I said that. And that's kind of the way I feel about coaching. I could just do this all day for free.
Thank you, John. That was great.
Thank you.
All right. Alan Meyer, we're going to jump to you. And you gave a great presentation a few weeks ago. You talked about the Federal Internal Coach Training Program, which you have started. And I loved, I mean, you have been such a big contributor in government to creating a coaching culture. You've graduated over 800 coaches, employees from that program. So fantastic. We're going to love to hear a little bit about that, but tell us what got you hooked.
Well, it's interesting when you were introducing John and you mentioned crisis management. I thought you were talking about me. And that's actually where I started in my career. I was actually a trained therapist and I was in crisis intervention. And so I'm saying, oh yeah, I remember that. But as interesting as I'm hearing Mary Kate's and John's and Alan's experience, and I think we all have a common thread. You know, we've all kind of, the calling, number one, number two, we kind of fell into it because of the calling. And so I can remember back in high school, I was a blue belt in karate and I taught the little kids the karate. And so the only thing I knew about coaching was, from my baseball coach, my football coach, my soccer coach, and thought, okay, you're yelling and screaming on the sidelines, And unfortunately, that does not work with little kids, especially in karate. That does not. And you have to instill a little bit more softer approach. And I learned that very early on in my life. And we'll talk later about those distinctions around coaching. And I do remember when I changed my behavior and talking to these little kids, how they responded. And they responded so powerfully, you know, and rather than me just yelling and screaming at them, because, you know, and of course my own karate teacher never did that. I just thought, okay, I better get these kids in line. But once I changed my approach, I realized, oh my, what a powerful tool here is to connect where people are, connect where they are and say, hey, you know what, you could do this. I'm reminded of Tim Galway's video years ago on ABC, where he was teaching people how to play tennis. And Alan, you're probably familiar with this story as well. You know, for the first time they never learned. So I was actually had those kids and teaching them how to do karate for the first time. And then I studied for ministry. I became a therapist. I got a degree in counseling. And then one day I decided I wanted to work for the federal government. And I was working for the Indian Health Service at the time. And I started to get these knocks on my door, you know, down in where I was working at the time. These executives who came in to the federal government from tribal organizations, and they come to me saying, "Well, the director says I need to talk to you." And I said, "About what?" You know, and they would actually say, "Well, I just need to learn more about the federal government." Okay. So I said, all right, so using what I already knew, which was how to ask questions, but I was coming from a therapy perspective. And then I realized that my therapy training was not it was great, but it's not as effective because there was a couple of things missing. But I was actually struggling through it for 10 years before I got trained as a coach at Georgetown University. And then that's how I fell into it. And I've been doing it for how many years now? Close to 30 years. And when I finally found out about what coaching really is, you know, I realized, man, what a powerful tool. Yeah. And when I got a coach and I used one, it was fantastic.
That's great. Fell into it is another common phrase we hear, yeah. Right? Most of us have done that. So Alan, let's stay with you for a second, because I want to move over to, before we start talking about a coaching culture, just making sure everyone is clear on what is coaching. I think if you ask 10 people on the street, you might get 10 different answers on it. So can you share a little bit about how do you define coaching?
Well, you know, there's the ICF definition, you know, about partnering with clients and really kind of getting behind what's important to them and partnering them to create transformation in their life. And I want to go back to my own story about what I thought coaching was. You know, I coached girls basketball, junior high basketball. And again, thinking I really had to learn how do we motivate people? And I just thought people have this thought in their head, you know, there's this person on the sideline just telling people what to do and how to do it. And that is not, that's that type of coaching. There's a distinction for what we're talking about. And we're talking about actually taking what people already know, their inner wisdom inside of them, what they know to be right and true, and bringing that out of people. And people don't always know what's inside. So that's our job, is to sit and listen, ask really probing questions, ask powerful questions around, okay, what is it that you already know? And by the way, the answer is within you. And I'm there just as a guide. I'm sitting with them and just, you know, and being curious about what they're about. So, and I know probably Mary Kate and Alan have, and John have other definitions to put on that, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So I think the big thing I heard too was, you know, I've heard partnership and powerful questions, but it's the client has the answers and you're trying to pull it out of them and help them think through that. And it's much more powerful for them instead of you telling them, well, here's what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mary Kate, I want to jump over to you. What's different about coaching versus mentoring or advising or?
Right. Well, I think it links very closely to what Alan was saying. Both the client and the coach show up differently. If I'm a coach, I'm going to show up and ask those questions and draw out from the other person. If I'm advising or mentoring, I'm going to share my wisdom. I'm going to share what I know. And I may even listen a little bit differently because I'm trying to think about what can I share as opposed to what can I help this person learn. And I think also the person being coached shows up. And when they're there to be mentored or they're talking to an advisor, they're there to just soak it in, to figure out what they want to do. Whereas if they're being coached, they're there to partner and to say, here's where I want to go, and to really start making decisions. And they own it. They own it much differently. What we decide for ourselves, we own much differently than what we're told to do.
Love that. Love that distinction. Thank you. And then Alan Fine, I want to ask you, really interested to hear from you. What are some misconceptions you've seen around coaching, and what do maybe leaders sometimes get wrong when they think about coaching?
I think one of the things we've already been hearing about from Mary Kay and Alan, and the way I would describe it is, I think coaching is often, and I think this will often come from the sports world, it's a teacher-centered approach. Mm-hmm. Whereas to me, the kind of coaching that we're talking about is very much a learner-centered approach. How do we create the conditions, not only for people to tap into their inner wisdom, but how do we create the conditions that sets up the right conditions or the right experience for them to learn whatever they need to learn? Because I don't know that everybody has every piece of wisdom that they need, but I do know they're phenomenal learners. And if you optimize those conditions, extraordinary things happen. I think out of the work I see in organizations, I think one of the most common misconceptions is people hold coaching as a thing that they do. So I am going to have coaching conversations on Thursdays with my people because I know coaching is a good thing. And then what that kind of calls into being for me is, well, if it's not Thursday afternoon, they're not doing the things that are so powerful about coaching. And for me, I think if we can help people understand what's more important than a coaching conversation, and there's a big value for those formal conversations, what's more important though is being coach-like in every conversation, because that's how we increase, I see it as like a ripple effect. You throw a stone in a pond, you get these ripples that spread out. Well, we have the opportunity to have an impact every time we have a conversation, if we're coach-like in that conversation.
So it's not just the one-on-one, the sessions that you've put aside to say, okay, we're meeting on Thursday to coach. It's, I think I was reading an article by you. I think you may use the example of someone's writing an email. There might be an opportunity to coach in that moment, to be coach-like.
Yeah, I think if we depends on how we define coaching, but if ultimately coaching is creating conditions where people can do their best stuff, why would we not want to do that each time we interact with people? And in my mind, every interaction we have has an impact. We may not want it to, but every interaction has an impact. So let's make choices that maximize that impact. Because if we don't, we're in danger of having a negative impact.
Love that. Thank you. I do want to remind before we move forward to the attendees, there is a chat. If you have a question, something you want to ask, put that in the chat, and we'll try to answer those. I'll ask the panelists as we go along. Alan, stay with us for 1 second. So I'm curious, when you're working in organizations and you're trying to teach leaders to be coach-like, right? How is that tough sometimes? I mean, to get them to shift from maybe, telling or advising to be more coach-like in all of their conversations?
Some more than others. I think there are some organizational cultures that make it a little more difficult, but it's also a lot to do with an individual's personality. I think there are some assessments we could make that would suggest that some people are going to find it more difficult to be coach-like than others. And then I find myself frequently challenging people, because you'll often hear things like, I understand this coaching thing, but I don't have time to coach. And that's, in fact, that's probably the most common reason that I hear people don't do what they say they would like to do. And I think that's not understanding what coaching is, because in my mind, coaching takes place in a conversation. So if they say they don't have time to coach, are they saying they don't have time to have conversations? Effective coaching is really about just understanding how you organize a conversation to create those conditions for learning. And I think when I try and hold the mirror up, now here's an astonishing notion, I try and coach them on the whole notion of what it takes to coach, because I think that's another common trap that we fall into. We think that coaching is such a powerful tool that we want everybody to be skillful at it. And then the way we try to help them be skillful is we put them through 8 hours of training on coaching. I mean, that's rife in the organizational world, which is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? I think as we're coaching them on how to coach, so we're giving it to them in bite-sized chunks, then we've got a chance of overcoming some of that resistance, because otherwise it's like we're expecting them to read the book and go away and be skillful.
Love that. Thank you. That's great. So let's shift into coaching culture. Let's dive into that conversation and in what that is, and then how do you start to build that? That's where I want to spend some time. John, let's go back to you. Can you talk about what does a coaching culture mean to you? What is that? How do you define a coaching culture?
I'll be delighted to, Ed. I appreciated what Alan just said about making every conversation a coaching conversation if possible. That there is a multiplicity to that. And I think that a coaching culture is when the organization, the department, maybe the division, leverages coaching practices, the skills that we have, the knowledge that we have, the abilities that we have to enable the executives, the senior managers, the frontline managers to go ahead and coach their employees. And what happens when you do that? That's changing the whole culture, the whole mind shift. It's an element of trust. The supervisor goes ahead and works with the employees to set goals, the priorities, establish what they're doing, bringing the employees' awareness up, caption what they already have, and just give you a quick, I always like case studies. Just like in MBA school, I always like those case studies. And just to give you an example, one of my employees is bringing organizational development and change management into the IT organization. I don't think these guys have ever met IT, OD, and change management. It's a happy moment. So they're all coming together. And she said, of course, I'm going to act like a coach, or it's part of my mindset now, or my vocabulary. And she came up with awareness. Wouldn't it be great if we could document this right before a big reorganization is going to appear, and write it up in a academic paper or a short summary that we can share to the other IT directorates. So it's not only just the coaching, bringing the best out of the employees, using their awareness, collaboration, trust, but it's also the learning organization at the end of the day. And isn't that a great place?
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think what I'm hearing from you, I liked what you just said about, it's about a learning organization. If we tie back to what Alan Fine was saying, it's about being coach-like. It is about a way of being, right? In a way that everybody goes around, about having conversations and solving problems together and working with each other.
Yes.
So what's the so what? So I'm an executive, right? And I want to ask Alan Fine this question. I'm an executive, and you're talking about, you're excited about a coaching culture. What's the benefit to the business? What have you seen in terms of benefits? We have seen studies that say increased productivity, stronger financial performance. What have you seen?
Oh, I mean, those to me are some of the key lag measures, because ultimately the point of coaching is to, one, improve the performance of the organization. So if you improve the performance of people, you're going to improve the performance of the organization. And then to me, it's also to change their experience of improving that performance. And I think coaching does that really well, because it goes back to this notion of being coach-like. When the conversations that drive what happens in an organization become more supportive, when managers and leaders are more curious about what's going on for people, when they're more candid, I think that generates psychological safety. And all the research I've seen says that's a really crucial thing to people doing their best stuff. You know, coming from the sports world, I'm always interested in what's the peak performance state for an individual. And that shows up when their mind goes quiet. And I think coaching provides an environment in which it provides an environment in these day-to-day interactions in which people can do their best thinking. And then it goes back to every conversation. You know, organizations, they fail much more often because of the poor quality of communication or execution than they do because they have poor strategies. So they have great strategies, but they don't get executed well because the communication that goes on between people isn't as good as it could be. And coaching, I think, creates a massive effect on how that communication happens, and how much people enjoy doing the work. I think it's transformational when it's done well. And that's not just in the business world. I mean, Alan was talking earlier about his early experiences in the sports world. When you see these coaches who think that coaching is screaming at people, they're really not in the world of the learner at all. They're just in the world of, I would say, satisfying whatever emotional need they have to scream and shout at people. And they claim to be results oriented, but I would argue not really, because if you start looking at what did I do and what was the result of what I did, it really creates a mind shift.
Thank you. That's great. And you know, as we were talking about outcomes and you're talking about how it helps with execution, you wrote an article around coaching culture, and you quoted that training alone can increase productivity by about 22%. But training plus coaching is shown to increase productivity by 88%. So I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, is that it helps with the execution piece of it.
Yeah, it's, you know, training in my mind tends to be education. Let's inform people of what's important. And there's, of course, a place for that.
Yeah.
But if that was all it took to change the performance, you would be interviewing right now a former Wimbledon champion, because I read everything that was ever written about how to play tennis. And it's pretty obvious I'm going to need a few more lifetimes of reading before that's ever going to happen.
Great, thank you. So Mary Kate, I have a question for you. And with your experience in around coaching in federal agencies, how are they going about building a coaching culture? So there's different ways to do it. Are they formally developing internal coaches? Are they bringing in external coaches? Are they developing leaders to be coaches? Is it a combination? What are you seeing, you know, as someone's thinking about, what does this look like?
I think it is all of the above. It's a little bit of everything that you mentioned. What I really like is that many agencies are being very intentional about it, and they have different tracks I know when I was at NASA, when someone was promoted to be a team leader or supervisor, we told them, you have a lot of different choices as how you engage, and coaching is one of them. And so we were teaching them from the very beginning skills to the point where, as people were moving further up in the executive branches or positions, we actually said, you need to spend more time coaching, and we would give them more. They would actually train to be coaches in one-on-one relationships, so that they were then, as Alan said earlier, it makes them coach-like. We at TEI and at several other agencies, we do coaching programs. As Alan's mentioned, we've been training people to have the skills that coaches need, so that they can show up and be present, they can listen, and and help people find their own answers. And what's really wonderful is that, as Alan said, you don't like take that off and say, I'm not coaching now. And that's what we hear from a lot of the supervisors of our participants in our coaching cohorts, is that they not only get a coach back, but they get somebody who shows up at work with these skills. They have better meetings, they have better engagement, and it's because they don't take it off when they go back. They become a coach and they kind of live it. So it's a little bit all of the above, but it all seems to come together.
Okay, thank you. That was great. And then moving on a little bit to Ellen Meyer, where should an organization or agency think about providing coaching services? So is it just at the top, right? Should it be, how do I think about that?
No, my immediate answer is everywhere. I mean, it's I literally mean that, everywhere. And so our big audacious hairy goal is to provide a coach to every federal employee who wants one. And that doesn't mean it means if they're a wage grade employee to all the way up to senior executive. Now, agencies have actually started in different places, and I know with Mary Kate's organization and others, they have a contract with contractors for SESers, senior executives, and then and those are usually they're pretty expensive, and so coaching was always like it's only for top performers or executives, and what we're trying to do is say, everyone could use a coach. And so that was the reason why we built this internal cadre. And also Mary Kate's got a very large cadre of federal employees who are providing coaching to people in her organization. And that's really kind of the big goal, is that we can start there. Talk about starting a culture is that people have to experience it before they catch on. You catch it rather than learn it. You just catch it. The experience was so fantastic. Wow, I like these conversations. They're powerful, just as Ellen was saying. Yeah.
You experience being coached, and now you want to learn more, and you want to be better at it. And now other people have that experience, and it just spreads.
And I would even add too, I mean, it's, we have to teach people the skills, but again, once you see people doing it, you start, because then it becomes a cultural thing. Culture, as Edgar Schein used to define it, as the way things are done around here. Okay. So everyone's having coaching conversations. Everyone's having these questions around, hey, well, what are you actually thinking? What's your strategy behind this? A particular action you want to take, because nobody has those conversations normally, right? They're different, and say, wow, nobody's asked me that before. Yeah. Nobody cared about my strategy. Thank you. So it helps them kind of think it through, and then so they catch that fire, so to speak, and they share it with somebody else. And that's just from the experience. We're not even talking about training people how to do the skills.
So to stay with that for a second, let's say maybe I'm a middle manager, I'm a leader. I've been coached, I recognize the value of it. I think it's really important in our organization, but we haven't done a lot of that yet. How do I get started? What advice would you give for those folks?
Yeah, well, this is another great question. Thank you and I've always believed it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. Okay, and that just start doing it. Start being a coach. Yeah. Even if no one else is doing it, do it anyway. And so it's if you start doing it, you start actually, rather than sitting down and telling people what to do, stop and ask them really powerful questions. How would you like to do this? What is your approach? Just start doing it. And then you can always do what we did. We just started training people on the skills, without permission. We were just teaching people how to do it, and then start from there.
Okay, great. Love that. And then I want to go back to Mary Kate for a second. So eventually an agency, an organization has to invest resources in this. If they really want to do this, it's going to take some sort of investment. So you've got to get senior leadership on board. How do you go about doing this? Do you put together a business case? How do you get them to buy into this?
Well, I think not to echo what Alan just said, part of it's the experience. And I know when I was at NASA and also at Treasury, it's making sure that those senior leaders experience coaching and really know what it is. So part of it's getting them on board through the experience. But I think there's also there's a lot of cases where people have been able to build the business case. And what I would say, sometimes it's hard to ask permission in government, but you can always do a pilot. And so make sure if you're going to do a pilot that you have key measures that you're going to measure. And I've seen some agencies where they do before and after as far as engagement of the coachees, or how engaged were you before the assignment and then after. And so figure out how you're going to measure what your success is and build that case. Because if you have those measures, we can always get lots of testimonials. Coaching gives you a lot of testimonials, but if you can get some measures that you can also share along with those testimonials, I think you can build your case. Just be thoughtful about it. And remember, pilots are a great thing.
Love that. Great. Thank you. Yeah, key measures, right? And if you're measuring engagement, we know that, and there's a lot of data out there, increased engagement drives performance, right? Drives productivity, drives retention. I mean, it's connected to a lot of other key metrics as well. Thank you. I want to go to Alan Fine. So Alan, can you talk a little bit more about how you can help develop the coaching skills of managers and leaders? What are some of the most effective ways about doing that?
To me, it would go back to the distinction I think we mentioned earlier about, do we train people to coach or do we coach people to coach? Because I would guess on this call, we're all fans of coaching because we know it's one of the biggest levers you can pull to change behavior. And I think one of the things that happens in coaching that is different from training is that it brings people's attention to, brings discipline to their attention over time so that they keep paying attention to the relevant things. Because we human beings, you know, our awareness and our attention, it has entropy, you know, it just decays over time. We get distracted easily. So if what we want to do is bring that, if it brings that discipline, then as we want to build their skills, let's do that over time. Let's do that where they get one thing to go and try out. For instance, and this for me would be a perfect place to start with so many leaders, is do you have a goal each time you have a discussion? Go practice that for 3 weeks and see what happens. And then we could add to it, do you actually listen so that you can summarize to people in every conversation you have? You don't know, or you think you know, or why don't you go and ask people and find out, get some, and that kind of loop where they can get some feedback, where it creates some ownership on their part for going to do something different, to me, is how change really happens. I think one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in organizations is they think that if they do a really fun, powerful training program, that on its own is really going to start changing the culture. And in my experience, you've got to do things, and we've been talking about some of these already. You've got to enroll the leaders. You've got to make sure that the wins are clear for people. You've got to give them some way to have feedback about the gap between what they think they do and what they actually do. Because nobody goes to a training and goes, all right, I've got it, I'm perfect right now. Well, actually, I think that is an assumption many people make, and they're going to continue to make it without some mechanism to look in the mirror. Yeah. And I think organizations that think about coaching more than training coaching are the ones that get the biggest bang for the buck.
That is a great distinction, and it sounds so obvious, but that mistake's probably made so often, isn't it? Yeah, great, thank you. We do have a couple questions I wanted to ask, and Alan Fine, I want to ask you this one because this is something you brought up before. You were talking about around readiness of managers and leaders. So the question is, you know, how is the best way to assess the coaching readiness of managers or supervisors? They're saying this is a tools question. Are there specific assessments that are better for identifying coaching strengths and blind spots?
So I don't know is my answer. I've used as an executive coach, pretty much any assessment for me is really useful in getting the conversation going, where we're looking to improve their coaching skills. Because I tend not to view people as can they do it or can't they. I tend to, as a coach, I'm going to look at them and go, what does it take now to improve their level of skill with what they're doing in coaching right now? And everybody is coaching to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
It's how they go about it that can be problematic. So I think I've used some assessments that give you some insight into whether they're going to be more likely to be Bobby Knight is what comes to mind. They're going to be somebody that screams and shouts and does a lot of instruction, or are they going to be more empathetic? I think there are assessments out there that would measure somebody's emotional intelligence and their ability to be empathetic. But I think any of them out there can really help start the conversation about what can I do better. And for me, that's the most important thing, rather than putting somebody in a box and saying you're low here, you're high here, therefore you're going to be good at it or not. For me, that's not useful. Therefore, if we use them to say, therefore, these are some things that will increase your ability to have an impact, that's a much more useful place to come from.
Great. Thank you. That was a great answer. Thank you. And I'm one more question that came through, and I'm going to ask this for anybody can jump in on this, but what are some other metrics people use to measure the impact of coaching on an organization?
Probably retention. Oh, go ahead, Mary Kate. Retention, performance are always a couple of things, and ICF in there they have some ROIs for quantitative and qualitative for coaching.
Yeah, and I would just add that anytime you're trying to measure something, you need to look at your overall goals and what is it that you're trying to do, and then see if this performance is moving that goals. You want to try to capture things that you already measure. I know in some instances, organizations have seen a decrease in, complaints against harassment and EO, because a lot of things were that people just weren't understanding and there was a frustration would bubble up. And so also, but there's also, I've seen coaching used in like a call center where managers went out to coach the people instead of saying, here's how you're going to answer the calls. And, response times have gotten better, client satisfaction. So I think you have to say, what is it that we're trying to measure to do better at? And then how is this coaching skill helping us with that? I think it's really important not to measure something for the sake of having a measure.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
So can I add a couple to that I've seen used is, do people have a plan when they come out of conversation? Do they have a development plan? And do they measurably improve their performance over time?
Yep.
And I would also add to that employee engagement measures, and the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey is one of the tools that we use, that we try to extrapolate where how effective we've been in my organization where I work at the FDA. It's not always the best indicator, but it is an indicator among many that was already mentioned here.
Thank you, Alan. So let's move on. And John, I want to go back to you as we're kind of wrapping up. We got about 7 minutes left. Let's talk about impediments to coaching, to creating a coaching culture. And Alan Fine brought up one before that I was going to mention, because it's actually, there was a study done by the ICF and HCI in 2018, and they said the #1 impediment was a lack of time. Can you talk a little bit about any other barriers that organizations face in trying to build a coaching culture?
Sure, I'll be quick. We have a few minutes left. It's like turning a Rubik's Cube. There's many different ways of establishing maybe a coaching culture from the grassroots up, and as well as from the tops down. It's always helpful in any organization to have the buy-in from the CIO, CEO, CFO, any EIEIO, any of the top level guys who can kind of support you. If they can have a visualization, I think that's key, because they rose up in the ranks in some manner to get up to the very top. So they're very politically astute, what we used to call political acumen. And so they had their ECQs in the federal government speak. They got up to the top, not only the top, but the very top. So I believe it's always good to have a story, and that's very important. Have a story, give a visualization of how this coaching culture can change the performance, the expectations. And now, since we've had a change of administration, new politicals coming in, there's a whole new group of people talking to. Well, of course, there's always the grassroots, all the existing coaching people to go ahead and collaborate further out from their world. But it's, in some aspects, it's changing a person's worldview. But how do we do that? Through awareness and sharing that awareness of what coaching can do at this juncture in history, especially after COVID. I think is important as the government works towards transformation.
Great, thank you. And I think, you know, it's interesting because you talk about the importance of a story, how important that is to sell this. So it's that and the impact, right? The metrics, right? It's not one or the other. You need both.
Absolutely. You've got about 2 minutes to give your case and share it well.
Great, thank you. So we are coming towards the end. There was one other area I wanted to at least make sure we touched on and acknowledged. And one of the things, we know coaching doesn't exist in a bubble. So this coaching, often we see it tied to other initiatives within the organization, such as leadership development, such as diversity, inclusion, crisis management, and performance management. I want to just touch on one or two of these if we have time. Mary Kate, can you talk about how you've seen coaching incorporated into leadership development programs?
Sure. I think, again, I think it's getting the participants a coach. It's teaching them the skills. It's letting them share their stories of how it's changed their life and listening to other people's stories. So I think it's just kind of baking it in so that they experiencing it, but then they also learn the skills.
Great, thank you. And then Ellen Fine, let's talk about diversity and inclusion, because this has become so important and they're necessary components for robust organizations. We know that. How does coaching impact or support DE&I?
Well, in my mind, I think people always want to do the right thing. And what happens is their biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious, get in the way of them doing the right thing. And one of the things I think coaching does at its very heart is it helps people separate out, what I might call the circumstances or the facts of a situation from their interpretation, the meaning they give to that situation. And I think that's not just in the D&I space. I think just coaching itself helps people get past their blind spots, their assumptions. It increases their awareness. And when they increase their awareness, they then can take responsibility for making different choices. So what happens then in the D&I space is they start to realize how their blind spot is excluding people, and they can make a different choice. Mm-hmm. I think it can have quite a big impact on that, but less under the banner of D&I and more under the banner of how do I just become more effective in the world?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. So as we wrap up, we're down to about 2 minutes, and there were some other areas we're going to cover. We're not going to have time to. I just want to go to each of you and ask you, if you could give one piece of advice, right, to someone who's looking to get started down this path of creating a coaching culture. And Mary Kate, we'll go to you first.
Sure, I will start with the obvious is, and then this Alan said earlier, just do things that people can do. And I always tell people, try to ask more questions than using just statements. So just go out there and ask questions at meetings.
Thank you. And then John?
I think it's important to have a story in your back pocket
Hmm.
as you share coaching.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Alan Meyer?
Yeah, everything is great here. I would add being curious. Being just curious about what other people are doing, why they do it, and see what question, that powerful question to ask, about what might actually draw them in. And don't be afraid to ask the question. That's the other thing. Being curious and being courageous.
Being courageous. Great way to say that. Great. And Alan, fine. We'll wrap it up with you.
For me, it's enroll leadership, lead by personal example. So people walk away from a conversation with you saying, what just happened? Because they know something was different. And then a lot, as you're finishing with me, I'm going to seize the moment. I think people can start with themselves. I think there's a thing called self-coaching that is the precursor to being effective as a coach. So we're talking about questioning. Ask the questions of yourself before you go start asking the questions of others.
We could spend a whole nother hour just on that, I bet, couldn't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you to the four of you. This has been really fantastic. Love just sitting back and getting a chance to listen to you. I think our panelists really enjoyed this. Our attendees really enjoyed this as well. I'm sure they got a lot out of this. I'm going to turn this back over to Mel.
Great, and thank you. This was wonderful. Thanks to all of our panelists today. We really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Just some last announcements. So we do have one more in our series of creating a coaching culture. So don't miss our final session next Tuesday, February 23rd from 1 to 1:30. And the big bonus of you can connect with a coach. Do know that you must have attended at least one session live or watched one of the recordings that we've made available here on FeedLoop to be eligible for the free coaching hours. So definitely take part in that. We want to thank our event sponsorship partner, Cornerstone, and a big thanks to Ed Turry for moderating this session today with our panelists from Cornerstone, and a thank you to our platform sponsor, PTG. And we would love to hear from you. We continue to program our schedule, and we love to get your feedback on this session today. And I believe, Shonda, if you wanted to post that link for me in the chat, that would be great. We'll also be following up by email with this evaluation link. So again, thank you all for joining us live. This session was recorded, and we will make it available on the FeedLoop platform. So just a reminder, I believe we will be doing all our roundtables here in this platform. Whenever you log in, you're automatically taken into the lobby, and then you need to select which session that you want to go, and you'll find that on the left-hand side of your screen. Steve or Shonda, anything else you'd like to say as we close things out?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for a great conversation, and have a great day.
And I just want to say one last thank you to our panelists. I really do appreciate you giving us your time today and giving us your insight. Very, very, very great, good information that you shared with us. Much appreciated.